A few days back I of course gave my initial thoughts, first impressions on 1.49 as a whole, and I trashed a couple of cars. Mildly trashed, I would say, because I suspected, as it turns out thankfully rightfully suspected, that you could improve them. Now, generally speaking, you can improve most cars to some degree, but with certain vehicles there is like an underlying personality which you sometimes can't really get rid of, and if it's a bad personality for that particular car or a challenging one, sometimes there's not too much you can do about that. In the case of this one, I was sure that I could make it so much better, if not great. And basically what I did was, as you can kind of tell in the video, I took a racing approach, just went full on, stripped the weight, better tyres, better aero, all that kind of good stuff. Incidentally, I was really hoping somebody would have done a replica of the Yokohama version of the racing Gallardo, which was featured in Forza 4. They did, it looks fantastic, and you can bet your backside that's going to be in a future special projects pack. But this theory was centered around my idea of what I did with the LP640 back in one of the early special projects packs, where I replicated the RGT Lamborghini. It might even be the single special project that I'm the most proud of because of how different it is compared to the standard LP640, and most of that was from diff tuning with a bit of suspension thrown in as well. So I applied that exact same theory to this car, and lo and behold, it is immediately better. In fact, not only is it better, it's a vast improvement over this car. And I do find it kind of strange, especially for someone like me who 9 times out of 10 does prefer all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, especially in real life because it really comes in handy. But even in a game, I feel like most four-wheel drive cars, they're pretty consistent. They don't tend to surprise you that often in terms of what they're going to do. They do lose control at a certain level if you push them over the edge, but they can go so far up to that point that they're just naturally more forgiving to use, definitely very beginner friendly, and of course front wheel drive has elements of that as well, but they tend to also have some downsides in terms of torque steer and understeer, which four wheel drive sometimes can quite easily overcome, sometimes not. And the Gallardo was one of those. In fact, on the point of front-wheel drive, that was kind of my issue with the LP560 in standard form. It feels like a mid-engine front-wheel drive platform, like way too much of the torque is going to the front. I think the way I would describe it is it almost feels like it's got a torque split where it's like a 60-40, but in favour of the front end rather than the back, and it's just not a nice car. It's just not a pleasant car for me to work with. It feels like you're constantly fighting against the car rather than it working with you. The Audi R8 doesn't really feel like that. It's weird. For something that's based on the same platform, you'd think it would feel the same, but I never have that kind of bad response with the Audi that I do with the Gallardo. It's such a weird difference. In the case of this one, it's radically different. Now, for those who are just looking for a quick fix, if you do find the Gallardo to also have handling that you don't like in the way that I do, basically, if you want the super simplified version, way ahead of whenever I do the next special projects pack, go down to your diff, of course fit the fully customised one, and I would recommend having the front end on 1010, the back end on 6060, and for now that'll do, because that alone, with of course a centre torque split, which perhaps counterintuitively I've got set on 50-50, which is probably not what you'd be expecting, and you could certainly put that more toward the back to further improve it, but I did want grip. See, this is the key thing. You do want grip over the front end. You don't want it to just be tail sliding all over the place, but allowing your diff to do the heavy lifting, and then relying more on that rather than the torque split, I find is a very good approach to take, not just with this, but with a number of different Lamborghinis. It's funny how a lot of them tend to fall into that same pitfall, and they kind of always have whenever they've been included in Gran Turismo. Certainly in GT6 that was the case as well. LP640, LP560, Reventon and beyond. In the case of what this car is ultimately capable of, two of the undeniably badass things are, number one, the visual tuning, which is fantastic on this car. It looks so good with the racing stuff fitted. Clearly whoever implemented it into the game or the team involved really likes this car because, ironically given its physics, the visual upgrades are really, really good. The race exhaust, for example, being integrated into the rear grille is a really cool touch, and the fact that you can turbo this car is highly unusual for a naturally aspirated car, supercar or otherwise, in the game. Not to mention the fact that it's around 1,000 horsepower, or in some cases even more depending on what you fit. Well, I mean, you're talking like Bugatti territory at that point, which again is appropriate to real life given that the Gallardo kind of developed a reputation for having those crazy twin turbo swaps, which the Huracan kind of took the baton up from and continued that legend, those rear end exposed twin turbo monster drag versions that you see occasionally in real life. and of course a few other cars have followed suit, Audi R8 included for obvious reasons. In terms of its overall ability, to me this is a car which is definitely worth buying, but you really do have to sink a lot of money into making it way better than it was to begin with. The other way that you could take this approach, ironically, speaking to special projects again, is that instead of going down the full-on racing route, another thing which you might want to look into is going down the Balboni route, which of course is the rear-wheel drive version of this, named after Lamborghini's test driver. That's the blue version with the subtle striping, which is rear-wheel drive converted. It kind of became more of a thing, Audi R8s with rear-wheel drive, Lambos with rear-wheel drive, but back then that was more special because most Lambos at that point, the Audi era in other words, had really utilised four-wheel drive. In the case of the Balboni though, it was a more raw old-school approach, and that is an approach which I think really would work on this car. You leave the power relatively untouched, maybe drop the weight just a little bit, perhaps some slightly better tyres, and really focus in on that diff tuning, like I said earlier on, and even with just that, I guarantee the car will immediately feel better to drive. I did see a couple of people saying that they actually really like the car already. I don't understand how, really. I find it, like I said, pretty awful to work with as standard. Don't get me wrong, you can wrestle it under control and win a race even, but it's not a pleasant experience for me. And I can't be the only one that felt that way, and I certainly wasn't the only one who felt that way back in the day either in GT6. Despite my critique of the car, I do think it's a good addition. It was one which, if I recall, was on the leaked list again, so another tick off of that one, and we're gradually seeing those iconic Lambos restored to the game, which is cool, in addition to new stuff as well, like, relatively recently, the Urus. So clearly a lot of love being showed to Lamborghini, which is also cool to see. So like I said, that's it for my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours if you agree, disagree, maybe if you try out the build recommendation that I said, even just those subtle things with the diff. If you get good results, let me know, and of course stick around for the rest of the reviews of 1.49. But for now, thanks for watching.